Okay, we're all set for session number 3, and this is going to deal with discipline. We're going to address 3 character qualities that I want to introduce, but then we're going to jump into 2 other character qualities that I would suggest are directly connected with biblical discipline. And I want to say this first about discipline. I think discipline is probably something that we are influenced by our parents. Some of you grew up in a type of home that you just think, this was good for me and I appreciate this. And so I choose to discipline like mom and dad did. But Ann and I spend a fair amount of time counseling with moms and dads. We probably do more marriage counseling than anything, but even in family counseling, we do see sometimes where if someone was raised in a very strict, harsh, way beyond spanking, where the child dislikes mom and dad or they just completely rebel, it may cause that child, when they become an adult, think, I'm not going anywhere near there. I will not touch my kid. But sometimes, too, we've seen some who have grown up in an extremely free home with little discipline, cause them to head off in so many wrong areas of their life when they got older as teenagers. And when that child become a parent, they sometimes become a mom and dad with the attitude, I am laying down the law in my house, and they're not going to get away with what I got away with when I was a kid. So this is a very difficult area to balance. And again, you may not agree with me. I'm not trying to convert you to anything here. Through biblical principles, we're just giving you our own experience as a mom and dad. And you need to learn from Scripture. We need to stick to Scripture. And also to be able to learn from your moms and dads, from other moms and dads, and also to learn from your own experience. So what are some of the questions that come up in this whole area of discipline? How do I discipline? Is the direct question. What do I discipline for? How important is discipline anyway? What if my child or teen doesn't like me? That's a good question. When do I need to show patience? I thought we're supposed to be a forgiving, forbearing family. So where's the discipline part fit in, right? How does forgiveness work out in a family where there's discipline? Why have we included goodness in this area? We're going to talk about that in a moment. How important is it that mom and dad be on the same page in discipline? And how can I ever get this right? So I want to look at the 3 things to begin: patience, forgiveness, and forbearance. Because we need to get a grip on these so that we're able to see how they fit into this whole area of discipline. So we're going to look at patience first. And we're going to be very short. We're going to spend most of our time in the final 2. But patience allows God to work in your child. I think sometimes, especially as church moms and dads, we see this ideal for our child and we want them right there, right now. This is where we want them to be. And patience does not mean that we're lowering any goals here at all for our children. It just means that you're willing to work at it very hard. And you're going to allow time for this to happen. Think of it this way. Anything we do well in life, I'm going to say almost anything, requires patience on our behalf. I would say we do anything better if we are patient people. And this is true with parenting. The more patient we are, the better parents we are. I'm going to say for the most part, if you asked many moms and dads whose kids are long gone, say, do you have any thoughts about being a parent? I'm sure many of them, one of the top answers would have been, I wish I had been more patient, right, with my kids. The second area is forgiveness, and this is how we deal with disobedience. It's really an attitude of grace. This is the ability within a family to really forgive each other. This is vital. This is forgiving and forgetting what's been done. You may still remember the incident, but technically the way you deal with that child is forgotten. You're dealing with them as if it's forgotten because it's been forgiven. This is the ability within a family to truly forgive. It's vital. Nothing can be a burden to the atmosphere of this home if there's any thought of unforgiveness within that family. And again, this is not about being lenient. I know some of you are already thinking, whoa, wait a minute here. This is not about being lenient. This is not about having no rules. This is not about having low expectations. But this is everything about the kind of attitude that we need to have in a home. Think of a church without forgiveness. Because I sin and you sin. We all sin. If we're not a forgiving church, we might as well close the doors because we're not going to get along with each other. Same with the family. The reason we need to be forgiving people is because all of us sin. And the little sin nature in that little guy came from you. Came from me, right? Forgiveness. Our kids need to grow up in a home where they understand that, yes, I did something wrong, but I've also been forgiven. And we're not ignoring issues, we're dealing with them. There will be a time for discipline, but then there's a time for forgiveness. Forgiveness is huge. It sets a wonderful tone in your home that your home can never attain without forgiveness. And then forbearance, which is not laying down the letter of the law. This is not sin issues. This is shortcomings and my bothering Ann with my loudness in the morning. And this is understanding that my kids are limited, that I'm limited, that I have faults, that we do things that might irritate each other that maybe we didn't grow up with as a kid. And this can be really hard for perfectionists, frankly, that everything needs to be done just right. But we need to remember there's always a great room here to encourage each other. Understanding that not every event is going to work out great. Not every situation will be perfect. Raising our kids will require a lot of effort. There's going to be times that you're going to be extremely tired. And there's going to be times you're going to have to change your plans in your family. There's going to be some time when milk is going to be spilt everywhere. There might be a time where a fender gets dented along the way. There might be a time when getting a family portrait done that one of your guys throws up all over his nice little outfit. That happened to Ann and I. We had to change our plans. Or someone throws up his hot dog and gets ketchup in his hair, right? There's going to be those times. This is not sinful rebellion. This is understanding our limitations. We all make mistakes. And sometimes we should be able to smile about those mistakes. Okay, we're working on patience, you know that, forgiveness and forbearance. These are Christ-like qualities the Bible challenging us with. And then little Poindexter gets angry at Miss Penelope, and you tell little Poindexter to be kind. And then he punches Miss Penelope. We could say little Poindexter's tired, right? He's just tired. He's had too much sugar. You know, we hear the sugar thing more today than when our guys were growing up. I think you need to just continue to feed your kids Kool-Aid and ice cream, and then they become immune to that high sugar. It doesn't affect them in the least. This wasn't even on our radar when we were moms and dads, so I cannot help you with that at all. But sometimes we might say little Poindexter's tired, or he's had too much sugar, he's not feeling well today. And in fact, it was Miss Penelope that instigated the whole thing anyway, so probably should have punched her anyway, right? But here's the problem. He's been disobedient. He's stealing something from your home. There's two qualities that he's stealing from your home. I've been teaching this for a long time. He's stealing goodness and joy. This is something I've taught for a number of years, learning this over many years of counseling with families. And it really, in my mind, I haven't read this anywhere, But reasons for discipline, the two greatest reasons for discipline in the home. Number one is goodness. It's goodness. This is such an important issue at home. You wanted to enjoy on a daily basis in your home goodness. And I would suggest that goodness is the obvious reason we discipline our kids. We're teaching them what is right and what is wrong. We're teaching them what is good and what is bad. I would call this a goodness pattern. I believe this is what every home needs, every day and every night. And we might think this is an area of fun and joy and happiness, which we'll speak about, but because that's really important. But the area of goodness is such a factor when it comes to discipline. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. That word right there is the same word for good. Children, obey your parents, for this is good. Good, God says. In other words, there's a goodness in our children in being obedient. You understand why we're teaching this? Because this is right. It's good for them to obey. And it's our responsibility to teach them to obey because it's good for them. And you might say, Mark, that's a little obvious, but I want to stress that there's a massive responsibility here that when our kids are young, they obey us because by nature, they may not always want to obey us. And what this does as well is place importance on what we ask them to do. So if you ask them to, Poindexter, you need to come on in. There's a responsibility for them to be obedient to you when you ask them to do that. This is a pattern here that's being set in their lives. They learn to be obedient to mom and dad. That stays with them. Why? Because this is what is right. This is what is good. And it's mom and dad who are determining what is good in the home. It's not your child. It's mom and dad determined that. In other words, their obedience when they are young is your responsibility. And if they don't obey mom and dad, the question we need to ask is, when will they obey mom and dad? Because if they don't obey mom and dad when they're 3, and they don't obey mom and dad when they're 7, what about when they're 16? Are they going to obey mom and dad? If we don't teach them what is good now. So you're not teaching them just what is good and what is bad. It is good that they obey. Obedience is good for them. Just as it says later in that passage, parents, do not exasperate or provoke your children to anger. Well, the question becomes then too, if I yell at them now, when does that end? When's that ever going to end? And if I yell at them now, what will stop them from yelling at me when they get older? See, we begin a pattern in our homes, don't we? If I choose to yell at my kids today, am I going to say, okay, next year on June 1st, we're not going to yell? You need to stop that right now. We begin a pattern of parenting. The other thing I wish to mention regarding the goodness about discipline is it's the right thing to do because it promotes obedience. In other words, it's not so much what my child does. It's everything about my response to their behavior. The wrongness is not so much the action of my child, though that's part of it. The wrongness could be the reaction to that action. Don't be embarrassed about your child's actions. But it could be possible to be embarrassed by your own reaction to your child. You know what I'm teaching here? Children do things wrong. It's my reaction to that that's vital. Therefore, my discipline promotes goodness. In other words, it promotes what is right in my home. And it teaches our children to be obedient and to do what is right. The second one is joy. And joy is not quite as obvious in the minds of moms and dads, but I would suggest that it is probably as important, if not more. We often think that we teach our children obedience, we discipline our kids so that they will learn what is right and wrong and that they will obey us. But joy is a major part of all this as well. When our children are not obedient in the home, they are joy stealers from the home. The actions of our children can sap happiness from any situation in any home. In other words, you could have the greatest marriage ever, but if you have 12 kids that are acting up, it's going to cause some tension in that home. So to get this in their mind, I want to do this with three questions here. First question, number one, how do I discipline my children? How do I discipline my children? I'm talking smaller children here. Well, the obvious reason the first question I want to ask is why. The obvious reason is that you are teaching them right from wrong, so they know how to behave, and that they know what is right and what is good. But secondly, you're preserving joy in your home when you teach them to behave. Do not well-behaved children bring a massive amount of joy to you, right? Kids are fun when kids are good, right? They're a blast when they're good. I don't care if they're 5 or 19 or 35. They are fun when kids are good at home. You can go to trips in the car when kids are little. You can go to McDonald's and live it up when kids are little. You can go over to somebody's house when kids are little. You can walk down the street and get a popsicle when kids are little. And if your kids don't complain or whine and they are just completely content, they are a blast. And I could spend my whole day with that crew, right? So the why of disciplining children is critical, as there's so many benefits to them and to mom and dad and your home. And they also become a good influence on other families and other children. Now the next question gets a little more into the nitty-gritty. So when my child misbehaves, what do I do? So let's look at the obvious question. And I've really, again, not gained a lot here from books. Most of my knowledge comes from counseling, comes from scripture, the example of my mom and dad, other parents, and my own experience at home. I don't know if I got it on here or not. Okay, I'm going to go back. Okay, no, let's go there. Number 2. How do I discipline a small kid? And I got spanking with a question mark. I'm not here to tell you exactly how to discipline your kids. But I would suggest to you, and maybe some of you just need encouraging too, because and I know a lot of you do this, but some of you may just think you cannot do this today. But I want to encourage you that there's every room for spanking in the Bible. Certainly the whole matter of spanking is looked down upon today. However, the government law actually states this: parents can use reasonable force to discipline their children. There's no law against spanking, although it's completely taboo. And our culture cringes at swatting a dog on the rear end today. Our culture has sort of gone upside down in this whole area. I believe the government law says you cannot use an object, which I know some of my mom and dad did not, but some would have. But our culture would definitely frown on this. I believe for us the real question is this: is it biblical? That's the question. So we're going to take a look at some passages this morning from the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 13, he who holds back his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. That's a fairly straightforward verse that a parent who loves his child is willing to discipline. Some have tried to say that this is just a metaphor, using the word rod as a picture of discipline, but not necessarily hitting them with a rod. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to hit them in some way. But it's also not a standalone verse. Proverbs 22, folly is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. But there's also a verse that makes me smile, which is difficult to see as anything else than some kind of corporate. Some of you are smiling, so I know you're already thinking of it. It says, do not withhold discipline from the child, although you strike him with the rod, he will not die. So that's probably more than Poindexter. That you need to sit up, right? This passage leaves little room here, that he's talking here about corporate discipline. To understand that this must mean at least some kind of physical pain here, right? And this is also a major key. that we need to add to this, because some of you may not be used to this. Some of you are completely used to this. Some of you may grew up with this, and some of you may be abused by this as well. So let me give you some other things here. Without anger. Without anger. See, this has nothing to do with you getting mad as a mom or dad and then spanking your children. Don't dare do that. Don't get angry and spank your kids. Some teachers have suggested using an object so that children would know the use of that object. I personally never did. I took them to the room and used my hand on that part of their little bodies that just seems to be so designed for spanking, right? And you do that without anger. There is something very special about that. Also immediately, Proverbs 13:24, the parents is diligent to discipline. In other words, there needs to be some urgency here to discipline. When your son or daughter is being disobedient or rebellious, the best thing you could do is immediately take them to their room. It allows you to make sure that you are not angry. It's nothing about anger. It allows time for the child to consider what they've done. The older the child is, the more time you might take. The smaller the child, the probably need to do this really quickly. After a few moments, you go in, you talk to them about what they've done, and they most likely will understand what needs to take place and why immediately. Remember, you are in charge here. It's not your child. But also with reconciliation. See, after discipline, this is the time that you can reassure them that everything is okay. And you would allow them to come back with the family. Everything is forgiven. Everything's forgotten. And if there's something they can do to resolve a problem that they created, you give them that opportunity. There's no anger in the spanking. There's great joy in the process here of the restoration. And strangely, these can become one of the most gratifying moments for moms and dads and their kids. It really can. Next one is preferably by dad. Doesn't mean that moms can't spank their children. But if dad is there, it's best if this is dad. It is dad who needs to be the chief disciplinarian. The reason I say this is, especially as kids get older, discipline will become more difficult. Too often, much of this has been left to mom all along. That is not the ideal, dads. This is something that you want to get really good at, disciplining your kids. However you choose to do it, whether it's spanking or some other way, however you choose to do that, I would suggest, if you can, it would be dad. And this is also a rewarding place for mom when dads fulfill this role as well. I don't know if Oki ever spanked the kids, so maybe the odd time. I remember coming home from work, there might have been an issue with probably a middle-aged child that I might have to deal with. But usually it was the dog, frankly. Ted had done something wrong, so I'd come home, send Ted to her room, and tell her to think about what she had done, right? Dogs are funny, though. All I have to say to Ted is, Ted, what did you do? And they're like, what? She goes up to the barn, and it's just hilarious. Too bad our kids didn't do that. What did you do? Right? This is big, without threats. They know if they've done something wrong. You don't need to threaten with anything. If you don't smarten up, we're going home. I know we're on holidays for 2 more weeks, but we're going home right now. You're not going home, right? You're not going anywhere. Now you've done it, you're not going to have dessert for the next 12 years, right? You won't be allowed to have fun ever again. Never nag at your kids. Best to eliminate those things. Nagging has absolutely nothing to do with discipline. Has nothing to do with discipline. It's like yelling. It contributes nothing to your home. If a child acts up and he might be unaware that he's done something wrong, warn him. And if he disobeys, you discipline him. No anger, all calm, and everything's good. wherever and whenever. Best to discipline wherever and whenever the disobedience occurs. And remember, we're always disciplining for disobedience and rebellion here. Now, you might be thinking that can't be done, but I would say for most times, there might be some exceptions, but most times this could be done. If discipline is done consistently at home, I would also say these awkward times are probably less and less all the time. Our guys had the odd spanking, I remember. It would be very rare. I remember the odd spanking in some little small room down in the church basement. Probably little Marty got acting up, and he just needed to just be reminded there. Comes back all happy and with all his friends again. Or maybe discreetly in the van. You have to be careful. We don't want to be seen as, the world will not understand what we're doing, so we're always careful. If your child's acting up on a trip, what's the best thing to do? Pull off and discipline that child. And then get back in and keep going. It eliminates nagging. It eliminates threatening. It eliminates arguing. And what does it bring? Peace, calm, and joy to the family. And all it took was just a few tears, right? And it's over. You're shopping with 3 or 4 kids and you have an issue. Take them out to the car. Discipline the one who had the problem. Don't embarrass him in front of his siblings. Don't embarrass him in front of anyone else. And go back to the store and have fun as a family. Much better to discipline properly. And things are great. Shopping is fun. Everybody is happy. And you don't need to be embarrassed by this. That in a group setting or a church or wherever, you don't need to yell at them. You don't need to embarrass them. But lovingly and gently pull them away somewhere private, discreetly, and discipline them. So they learn wherever they are, whenever it is. If they disobey or they're rebellious, they'll be disciplined. That's a lot of work, isn't it? Some days little Poindexter might need 2 spankings on the same day. We always used to laugh with Mard. He got the second spanking because he didn't react well to the first spanking. And Miss Penelope might need a spanking once a month or once a year. Just never. So maybe it's just a lot easier just to nag, right? Probably. But nagging has nothing to do with discipline. You haven't taught your child anything. And in the long run, nagging is exasperating. And it's a lot of work, isn't it? Each of your children are going to be different as well. In this area, there's going to be some that are going to be easier than others. For us, it would have been our oldest and our youngest that needed probably more discipline. Hard enough that it hurts. We learned that from the verse. But never in anger. Always remember the process. Tell them to go to their room. Wait for a few moments. Talk about what they've done. And then discipline them. And then assure them that you love them. This is a great part of parenting. And it's heads and tails over nagging at them, yelling at them. This is so beneficial to your child. Your discipline instills in them that mom and dad love me and care about me. The discipline time is so short and it's over. And what you've restored in your home is the goodness and the joy that was stolen from your home by the disobedience. Never get angry. Remember the process. Tell them to go to their room, wait a few minutes, and discipline them. Assure them you love them. It's a great part of parenting. And therefore, never give them a whack out of anger. Don't do that. Don't do this outside of the process. Again, I'm just giving you my own experience here and what I would have learned from my own dad. Never hit your child out of anger or hit them out of impatience. Always out of love. Always within the process. So the child understands and learns from the discipline. understanding the benefits. So I want to give you a few verses which I believe are great encouragement, that we would see God's intention for us as parents. It's a great verse. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a wise son will be glad in him. Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her rejoice who gave birth to you. And then discipline your son, and he will give you rest, and he will give delight to your soul. That sounds like goodness and joy to me, right? A good disciplined son, a good disciplined daughter. Sometimes we view the word discipline with such negativity. If it's done in the way that within Christian love, within Christian spirit of Christ, the gentleness and the love and patience, it is such a blessing, discipline. That's the goal. Our children will bring rest and blessing and enjoyment to us. And there's a great encouragement here that this is the Lord's intent. That discipline is a good thing, goodness, and that it results in rejoicing and gladness and delight and joy. That my consistent, obedient discipline results in a goodness pattern and a joyful home. Any thoughts or questions at this point?
One thing that I was thinking is, anytime I think back at disciplining my kids, and that there were times when it was out of anger or embarrassment, that was such a stumbling block for them not being able to be self-reflective.
Yeah.
Our anger allows them to focus on our sin instead of on their own sin, and it's just so counterproductive to the reason why you're doing what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, because ultimately discipline is good.
Yes.
It really is. And to teach our kids. You know, it's funny. I remember playing table hockey downstairs. It's funny. And I said something. I didn't swear, but I just remember saying something that my dad didn't want me to, and he smacked me. I still remember that. It's amazing. And yet that's the only time I ever remember that in my life. And my dad would probably, if you asked him, he'd say, yeah, you know what? I acted out of anger. I remember that. I'm going to share with you something that happened between me and my oldest son. I think it's tomorrow, but you remember those times when the patience wasn't there, maybe, or you were angry, and you missed the lesson. You really did. You maybe solved the problem, and they were afraid of you, or were good, or somehow made them behave, but you didn't teach them anything really. It wasn't part of real discipline that the Bible's speaking about here. I know I'm not here to convert everyone. I just want you to think about those things. And I want you to understand the freedom in the Bible to spank. It's there. You can't dispute that. It's quick. That's what I love. It's quick, and it doesn't sap joy from your family. I've never been someone to take away privileges, and I'm going to wait for some tomatoes thrown at me here. Though I'm sure it's effective for some of you. I would much rather discipline and quickly, and everyone is still able to come out and have the popcorn after. To say you're not going to watch, you're going to sit in a room where everybody's going to have fun and eat popcorn and eat Pop-Tarts and whatever. I struggle with that. But you've got to battle that one through. And some have asked me the age of when to start. Well, you know what? 2-year-olds know when they've done something wrong. 1-year-olds almost pretty much know when they've been disobedient. They know what good behavior is when they're pretty little. The age of when to quit, I think that's harder. I think that might vary from child to child. I've often told people, probably around 10, 11 for boys. Spanking a girl at age 10 just seems wrong to me. Maybe that's because I'm a male, but I would say less for girls. They just mature more, and you just want to be careful. And so I would say it's probably less for girls, maybe around age 8. It depends. It's going to depend on the girl. We have my 2 granddaughters that were here a few Sundays ago. Violet looks like she's 16. And the other grandchild looks like she's like 9, and they're both the same age. And so you have to be, sometimes it depends on the child. I don't think timeouts will ever replace spanking. I just think there's a great need to do the process. Okay. How do I discipline older children? I'm an expert in youth ministry, teen ministry. I have no idea. I really don't. I struggle with this greatly. And some of you ones with older kids are probably, oh, great. Yeah, I know. That's what I guess to tell you how they can be perfect without disciplining them. I know some of you would use some kind of longer-term discipline, such as grounding or taking away privileges. I can only give you my own experience. I never did that. That's all I can tell you, is we never did that. One of the greatest lessons in the area of forgiveness in the story is the prodigal son. This, I believe, is the kind of atmosphere we want to display at home. It's at an age probably when he was rebellious. But the Bible teaches sort of this no-hold forgiveness. We have the story of two sons. One who demonstrates all the rebellion that we completely fear, frankly, as moms and dads. The other one just demonstrates rebellion on the inside. And you have two sons here with a problem. They both have a heart condition that they inherited from their dad, right? And the problem of sons and daughters rebelling against mom and dad is real. Within the same families, you have those who trust Christ and those who do not trust Christ. Same influences often. There's those who seem to do well, like the older brother, only seem to do well. They're not really, but they seem to. And there's those that seem to rebel at every turn, like the younger son. And then there's those who you just think, Lord, this was really easy. It was good. Thank you. So the lesson in the story of the prodigal son is the fact that you have two different boys, and yet both have a heart condition. And the issue is a sinful heart is very real and certain in our kids, whether it's obvious or not. And you can eliminate them from every influence you want. But sin is not what you take in. What is it? Where does it come from? It comes from the inside. We were born with this. This is part of us. And as I mentioned before, though I devoted most of my life to youth ministry, I find this lesson the most difficult. And now as I deal with older children, it's more about what I describe as directing rather than actual discipline. The disciplining of young children, I would say, is somewhat straightforward. It just takes a lot of work. And it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of wisdom. It does require a great deal of energy and love and patience, and disciplining children is far less a matter of necessarily what to do. I think it's somewhat straightforward. It's just a matter of doing it, and being consistent in doing it, and understanding discipline is good for them, and it's good for you as a parent. Also, I hope we've stressed enough in this series that the importance of mom and dad growing spiritually. I'm convinced that most of my problems as a parent are not necessarily about my children. It's about me. It's about my spiritual growth. Much of the instruction Paul gives to both Ephesians and Colossians in the whole area of relationships, my marriage, my family, my children, my working relationships, are based upon my heart character. A willingness for Mark to submit. A willingness for me to be joyful, to be thankful. That I'm controlled by the Holy Spirit, that I'm being directed by the Scriptures. And if I'm struggling with serving my wife, and I'm not loving her like I should, if I'm not caring for her, if I'm not trying to understand Anne, if I'm not thinking about what Anne's dreaming about, what does Anne need, then it's going to directly affect my relationship as a dad. The same thing with mom. If you're not submitting to your husband's leadership, it's going to have a negative impact on the spiritual maturity of your children. Likewise, both mom and dad, if you're angry in the home and you're not practicing joy and thankfulness, it will affect your kids. You can't erase that. I believe what we find here is the procedure of disciplining smaller children is clear, but the results when children get older have much more to do with our spiritual growth. I really do. We can't border, we can't control like we can when our kids are little. We can't safeguard things. It's our character that's going to be the major, I'm not talking about not disciplining here, I'm talking about the major influence on our children. Now, these behaviors come into play in a great way when it comes to disciplining, because the whole process of discipline requires love, joy, thankfulness, and patience. In the early stages of marriage, when children are young, we haven't had a whole lot of training. I remember Ann and I sat down with Pastor Stairs once before he married us. It was probably a half-hour session. That was it, right? And I just all remember him telling us, he said, you guys need to wait about 4 years and have a couple of kids. So we waited a couple of years and had 4 kids. So we just we got it mixed up, I think. But there's no advantage to thinking, I'm on top of this or I'm smart here. There's an urgency, I think, when you're young to begin to work hard on these kinds of quality. They're important in teaching your children through your example of how you live. And there's a gradual transition which takes place in the lives of our kids, where our style of discipline, I think, begins to change. When girls maybe get around the age of 8, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but you can think that one out yourself. Maybe boys right around 10 or 11, depending on how big or little they are. When one of the most difficult times in parenting is when little Poindexter, who has been this little disciplined guy with the tie on in church, comes to mom and dad at age 14 and says, I want to go to so-and-so's house, and such is happening. And then you start to think as a parent, parenting little kids was so easy. Man, I just thought I could just start playing Lego here, right? That was the life, right? When kids thought mom was great and dad was great, kids were home, you went on holidays together, you ate supper together, and you took them to school. I mean, that was, I remember the first day I took our oldest to school down the street. I thought it started at 9, it started at 10 too. And has a video of us walking to school. First day, great example from Dad, and the bell rings. So we were late the first day when Dad took him to school. What do you mean? All of a sudden you want to go to this party, right? What's going on at the party? Who's going to be there at the party? I thought we were going to play G.I. Joes tonight, right? I missed that, the Lego, the G.I. Joes, the taking shots down the hallway. I mean, that was all, you had the net set up at the end, and we used to take shots with the mini sticks, and I could just read, and I beat those guys at everything. That was a blast. And I want to encourage you guys, the smaller kids, and as you think about this as they become teens, if you put your mind to this, you're going to have a ball with your teens. You really will. Watching our guys play high school football is a classic memory of, I would do that over again in a second. That was so much fun. Ping pong tournaments in the basement. Sunday afternoon skits with their church friends downstairs. We used to get ready for church Sunday night. The basement was a complete disaster. Camping retreats, youth retreats, acquiring daughters was a blessing. I remember the first time we met Kelly. I was nervous, Ann was nervous, Kelly was nervous. And all our other daughters we knew from youth ministry at church, but she was from the States and never met her before. I miss those days, every much as I miss the little guy ages as well. And because I did not ground our older children, in fact, I don't ever remember taking privileges away from them. All I can share with you is what we did. And I would say our most common way of discipline with our kids was heart-to-heart talk with them. I think it's pretty hard to have a heart-to-heart talk with a 5-year-old. But you can have a good heart-to-heart with a 15-year-old. And to be able to sit down with them calmly, we're talking procedure here, we're talking patience, we're talking calm, we're talking love, we're holding something here within the family. And you trust that whatever the situation might have been, you trust that this time in their lives that there's a good desire in them not to want to disappoint mom and dad. I remember my son Andy had his license. Matt didn't have his license yet. And they went out to McDonald's, and then Matt was going to go for he was learning, and they were in the church parking lot. And Andy was going to demonstrate some skills to him. Well, Matt got behind the wheel unbeknownst to Dad. We were like 3 minutes from the church. And so he goes to put it in drive, puts it in reverse, and backs into the church. And so we had a little ding on the back fender and a couple little bricks broken in the church building. And so all of a sudden Andy shows up. They didn't even touch the car. They probably looked at the ding and thought, this it's trash. We're getting rid of it, right? Andy comes walking home, knocks on our front door. It's an old house, right? I come to the front door, and I just got guilt written all over him. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, Dad, we had a problem. We had an accident with the car. And I said, Andy, what happened? He said, well, we're down at the church. Okay, so Andy and I walked down to the church. Well, Matt is sitting on the curb bawling. Like he's 15 years old. He's just completely, or 16 or whatever, bawling here. And I'm going to tell you tomorrow of not a good time as a dad. But we just talked about that situation and talked to both of them. There was no anger. And it was good. It was good. And I think all three of us think back to that time and think, yep, that was wrong. I sinned, but it was all good. And we got through it. And it was a blessing. But to be able to sit down with your kids calmly is such a... So see what you're doing when you're disciplined time when they're 6 and 7. That's what you're doing. You're preparing those times in the bedroom when they're looking at Dad and thinking, man, Dad loves me, you know. So that when they look at you at 16, they think, yeah, Mom and Dad love me, even though I did what was wrong. I share with you many times the great value also in complimenting your kids. This is the other side that we can't forget. To constantly say to your kids, love what you did. And I know I've drilled this home many times, but to be able to say that after the fact is even, I think, more of a blessing. To bring up something they did 2 days prior. I remember what you said there to Nana the other day, or I remember I saw you at church. Really proud of you. That takes those little hearts that are 14 and goes, whoop, like that. And they know that you notice what they did. So it's not just like, good job right away. Like that's, some of you can do that. I mean, you're a football game, you say, great, that was awesome, Aaron, great catch or whatever. But 2 days later, I saw you talk to your coach after the game. He really seems to like you. I like that, Aaron. Thank you. That was good. When we had my 2 grandkids here, Lucy and Violet, they're grade 7 girls. They were nervous about coming to church, just because they don't know anybody, and they're self-conscious at that age completely. And they said to Nana, they wouldn't come to me. They said, Nana, where's Papa going to sit? And Nana says, well, he usually sits near the front. And I heard Mom, and I said, oh yeah, when we get to church, we're going to sit right in the front pew. and so then when we sat back here, they were a little better with that, actually. And I just remember what we did. They were here, and then I had a meeting after church, so we were a long time. And then they were just jumping around and whatever, probably on their own. They'd be a little afraid to talk to anybody. But on the way home, when we got home after, I went into both of them. And I said, you 2 girls at church with me this morning? I was really proud to have you at church. And it was just fun to be with you guys. And that takes a situation that instead of, I got to go to church. Or, I mean, they go to church. Violet does. Lucy does not, but Violet goes to church. But it takes a situation where it seems like you're making them do something. You're forcing them to be obedient. And you teach them something that was good. And it was nice to have you with me. That was a blessing. I do remember saying to our kids from time to time when they wanted to do something and we had to say no. And I'm going to talk about that tomorrow morning. Those times come up. And they get harder probably as our kids get older, and again, dads, the better you can do it, get at this, the better. But we always say to our kids, often used to say to our kids, sometimes there's advantages of being an Ottaway, and sometimes there's a disadvantage of being an Ottaway. And they might be thinking, guess what? The thing I want to do right now, this is one of those disadvantaged times of being an Ottaway because I can't do it. But you also trust that being an Ottaway, and you also trust that being a Levitt, or you also trust that being a Teeple is a whole lot of fun. A whole lot of fun. So it's not always the no, but just to be in that family is a joy and a blast. Because my mom and dad love me. And we have a home that's good, and we have a home that's joyful. Well, we're going to talk more about get into growing children tomorrow morning, and then we're going to just sit and talk about family tomorrow afternoon.